Hi, from New York Public Radio. Welcome to a virtual version of The Green Space, New York Public Radio's dynamic street venue, street level studio, performance room, interview room. All of that closed, but not stopping us from bringing you tonight a live set with Arturo and Adam O'Farrell, who are joining us from LA. And guys, Arturo, Adam, good to see the two of you.
Good to see you, John. Always, sir. Always.
So we have a lot to listen to, a lot to talk about. But in the interest of getting to music as quickly as possible, the first song you're going to play is called El Múcuch. Both of you individually have recorded versions of this song. Where does it come from?
I was doing a little research a few years ago, just kind of learning about different Mexican music. In this song, I found a recording of it by a Mexican brass band. I don't know if you would call it banda necessarily, but it wasn't quite in that style. But it was a Yucatan brass band, and they had a recording of this song, and I arranged it for my quartet, and then my dad asked me to arrange it for his big band.
And then we recorded it when we were in Mexico at the border. So it has a long history with us.
All right. It's also a great way to open because it's a catchy tune. So let's hear Arturo O'Farrell at the piano and Adam O'Farrell playing the trumpet in this version of El Múcuch. Well, there you have our guests, Arturo O'Farrell at the piano, Adam O'Farrell playing the trumpet, and an arrangement of this traditional Mexican song called El Múcuch. I hope I didn't curse when I inadvertently rechristened it El Múcuch a few minutes ago.
Only in 23 languages.
Now, Arturo, you were in residence at the Green Space, when it was still open, and, you became a familiar presence in our ground floor performance studio.
Yeah.
And it seemed like it was never just about playing some tunes. There was some kind of idea behind the programs that you did.
I have the vanity of thinking that musicians are allowed to have opinions. And so I called my series Musical Acts of Deviancy. And we had themes like frenemies at the piano, in which we gathered an impersonation of the president with me and Paquito, whom I hadn't played with in many years. And,
Paquito de Rivera.
Yeah. And we did all kinds of things. And it ended up that we did the world premiere commissioned by the Green Space of a piece that I wrote called Gulab Jamon, which is a combination of Indian and Spanish food. And it was a piece that dealt with fluidity, recognizing that we are all part of one another, and that fluidity is truly our nature. And so I have to say that Green Space residency is one of the high points for me of the work I've done.
Yeah. Well, the last couple of LPs that you've done have also been driven by big ideas. The idea of borders, with the Mexican-American album that you did 2 records ago. But the new record, called 4 Questions, is, if anything, even more explicit in its messaging, it seems.
Well, I was moved by watching Dr. Cornel West speak one day at a dialogue called Revolution in Faith. And he electrified me, and I just saw literally an orator that spoke like John Coltrane played. So the idea came into me that I would like to write a concerto for him. And so I was lucky enough to be in the MacDowell residency with time on my hands and research time. And I was lucky enough to partner with the Apollo Theater, and they commissioned the piece. And then finally, I was lucky enough to convince Dr. West to record this piece with us and to perform it at the Apollo. And also, the whole album is really about my feelings, which are sometimes a little political, sometimes just a little, sometimes a little social.
Yeah. Well, Fandango at the Wall, the Mexican-American project, was both political, but as the title Fandango implies, you could dance to it. You could have a good time listening to it. The 4 questions, they're serious questions. And, it's pretty of the moment, I guess I'll say.
They're questions that are first poised in a book called Souls of Black Folk by W.B. Du Bois. And the questions have to do with what does oppression do in the face? What do the oppressed do? How do we act? How do we preserve our humanity so that we don't become like our oppressors? And I know that I'm allowed to say this in this setting, but we're in the midst of a great and terrible and dark moment in American history, and we are not going to lose our humanity and our dignity. We refuse to. We will continue to make art. We will continue to uphold one another, and we will continue to walk in a way that propels each one of us foot by foot through the future.
Well, one of the surprising byproducts of the pandemic has been the decrease in consumption of fossil fuels. The air is measurably cleaner. The birds are singing lower because they don't have to strain to be heard. There are all these things. And Adam, it seems like, in addition to inheriting your father's musical gene, you also, with your last record, for example, if I call it a CD, I have to put CD in air quotes, right? Because you've made like a real conscious commitment to decrease the amount of plastic in putting your music out.
Yeah, it's a great Biophilia Records. It's a great label. It was. I was drawn to it for those reasons. I was also I liked the idea of the fact that it was sort of starting out at the time, and that like it wasn't like it wasn't like Blue Note all of a sudden changed their ways of doing things and started printing paper, biodegradable paper, albums. It was that a label was doing this from the ground up, as like a sort of it's the origin of their concept as a label and as a in its existence. And it was only like a year or two old when I put that album out with them, and it was cool. It felt good to kind of be a part of what they were doing.
Yeah. So when people buy the record, what are they actually getting?
They get it's kind of like an origami. I wish I had one here. It's like an origami sort of like there's a cover in the back, artwork and titles in the back. Then instead of it opening, like a jewel case or something like that, you open it up and first the cover. There's two sides to it, like 4 different panels. The front has the artwork, and also has like information about the tracks. But then like when you open it up, you see pictures and liner notes, and it's really it's cool because it sort of threads together everything. Like sometimes you get like those ECM records and it's like 20 pages of material, Yeah. And so it's like nice to have something that's all just sort of in one compact package,
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You mentioned origami, which of course is Japanese, and there's a kind of Latin jazz influence in the music. So you have East meeting, this kind of East Asia Latin jazz meeting, which happens again in the next piece that we're going to hear, called Bebo no Aozora. Whose arrangement? This is a song by Ryuichi Sakamoto, the great Japanese composer, producer, DJ, actor. Yeah. So whose arrangement is this?
I just transcribed it too, and I wouldn't even call it an arrangement.
What's interesting? I felt that really something happened organically with this performance that I'm just stunned by. It breathes in a way it doesn't need an arrangement. We really literally just played the tune, but in the way that we paced the flow and the progression of the music, it really became an arrangement. It's a very gentle moment in my life to play this piece with Adam and to see it kind of flow in a very origami-like fashion, Tai Chi.
Well, it's as I say, it's a piece originally by Ryuichi Sakamoto, who, while Japanese, is a lifelong fan of Latin music, Brazilian music in particular, but Latin music in general. And this was originally from his soundtrack to the film Babel. So let's see what you guys have done with it. From the virtual green space, once again, Arturo and Adam O'Farrell. It's a beautiful tune, originally from the Babel soundtrack by the Japanese composer Ryuichi Sakamoto, but you've just heard it played by Arturo and Adam O'Farrell, piano and trumpet, respectively. Bebo no Aozora is the name of it, and you did a little quick sleuthing there, Adam. What's the translation of that title?
Beauty of the Blue Sky.
Yeah. Sounds like maybe he's kind of mixing a little Japanese and a little Spanish or Portuguese in the title there. I want to thank everybody who is tuning in to watch Adam and Arturo performing in our virtual green space. As I mentioned earlier, Arturo was artist in residence in the green space. Seems like years ago when the place was open. And we are, doing our best to continue to bring you interviews, conversations, live performances from the green space, and thrilled to have Adam and Arturo and you here with us. And the thing is, it does cost money to do this. And, the green space is part of New York Public Radio. And so if you are in a position to make a donation to New York Public Radio tonight, we would be glad to accept that from you. And it's really easy to do. All you need to do is text the word live to 70101. So just text live, that word, to 70101, and we'll text you right back with a form to fill out and make a contribution on behalf of the Green Space, which has been so important to multiple communities here in New York, not just the musical one, although obviously, Arturo, that's where your passion lies in the series of programs you put together for us.
Yeah, I've had the privilege of sharing a platform at the Green Space with Ayodele Cassell, Dr. Cornel West, so many people in my life. I had the privilege of being on stage there with my children, and I want to give a shout out to Zachster. Yo, Zach, what's up? Zach, my other son, he's a great composer, arranger, and drummer, and he in fact he led our Fat Cat Afro-Latin youth program at the Green Space, and we miss you a lot, son. So
Zach is still here in Brooklyn, right?
I think he's doing good. He's with his beloved Sasha and the great Ricky Rodriguez, so he's cool.
All right. Now, both Zach and Adam represent the third generation of great musicians in the O'Farrell family, because of course your dad was Chico O'Farrell. How hard did you push these guys? Were you one of those parents who thought, I don't want them making the same mistake I did, I don't want them following, or was there maybe a gentle, hey, you should think about this?
You know what? We never really pushed them. Allison and I decided early on in the game that they would have some discipline. We didn't care if it was ballet. We didn't care if it was painting. We didn't care what it was. And since they grew up thinking that everybody's mom and dad plays the piano, Adam took piano lessons, Zach took drum lessons, and eventually Adam discovered the instrument of his grandfather, the trumpet. But we didn't really push them. The only thing we did push them to do is to take the illness and spread it far and wide, because we made them run a jam session for kids, and that was about the only time that we really had to get them up on Sunday mornings at Puppets Jazz Cafe. We used to make them run the kid jazz jam session at Puppets, and that's the only time we ever felt like we were, go ahead, get out there, push. But other than that, they've both been very self-motivated and highly dedicated performers.
Nice. Well, now you also have a wider musical family. Tell me about the Origin Collective.
Origen is a brand new
Origen. Okay.
With a hyphen. ORI-GEN. It's a brand new collective that we've started. Kind of Pablo Aslan and myself got the idea that we needed to corral forces that very often got left off the plate when talking about festivals and performance opportunities. And so we literally got a league of superheroes together with incredible prowess and names like Miguel Sinon and Sofia Rey and Lara Bello and Antonio Sanchez and Papo Vasquez and Rogelio Bocato. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you the people that have agreed to join forces together to work us. And I know it sounds slightly communist. That's in a collective, proletariat fashion to kind of challenge the way this programming is done, the way that Latin, what we call Latin, but is really Pan-African, Pan-Latin, or the way this music is disseminated. And it's a privilege to share time with these folks and to see incredible new initiatives in music presentation taking shape.
Yeah. Well, your dad sort of did that without forming a collect, just by the force of his own musical personality, was able to sort of get people to recognize that Latin music was not a single monolithic thing, but rather, a huge expanse of sonic possibilities.
Yeah, it's kind of been, I hate nostalgia and I hate nostalgic jazz. So I never tried to replicate what Chico did. But I feel like his vision and his sense of adventure and understanding the vast world of not just jazz. I got to tell you a story. My father had a ritual at 5 o'clock in the evening. The lights would go down, the shades would be drawn. He'd mix himself one or two cocktails, highballs. They used to call them highballs. And he would listen to everything from Ligeti to Count Basie, from Miles Davis to Tito Puente. And this is what he taught me, that this spectrum of music is huge.
Yeah.
Huge. And we cannot encamp ourselves in little tiny definitions.
Adam, you grew up in a different time when, a lot of, in the iPod era, all of those genre walls were breaking down. Did your dad have any kind of crazy rituals that taught you anything along those lines?
No, I mean, no, there weren't really many. I wouldn't say any rituals. I mean, no, I mean, the only thing closely at all resembling a ritual was, when we every summer we would rent a house for a few weeks, upstate New York, and I remember listening, kind of similar to what my dad said, listening to like a very wide spectrum of music in the car, these long car rides, putting on everything from, the Beatles' White Album to Messiaen, Coltrane, Cheeto Rodriguez, Steely Dan, Prince, like everything imaginable, So, I was also sort of like encouraged at an early point to appreciate music on a much broader level,
Well, you mentioned the Beatles, and the song we're going to hear next is, in fact, an arrangement of Blackbird. And Arturo, am I misremembering? I think I've heard you kind of weave Blackbird into an improvisation of something else that you were doing at one point.
I was at the gala. I was at the NYC gala. Yes. I was at the NYC gala, and I was allowed to play a solo piano piece. And I remember there was some horrendous political event that had taken place around the time of the gala, and everybody was very hushed. And so I chose to play this piece that Paul McCartney has spoken very much about, being a tribute to the civil rights movement, and it's also a piece that I happen to love because I grew up with Blackbird.
So it also has, I mean, there's something about the chord progression that it seems to give you a lot to work with.
It's one of those pieces that it's so diatonic that you can actually, when you slip non-chordal tones into it, it still sounds diatonic.
All right. Well, that's why I remember it now. It was New York Public Radio, the WNYC Gala, and it was just you. But now let's hear you with Adam and the trumpet in this version of the Beatles' Blackbird. It's a lovely version of the Beatles' Blackbird, played by Arturo O'Farrell at the piano, Adam O'Farrell playing the trumpet. And one of our listeners/viewers was wondering why Adam and Arturo are in LA when they are both New Yorkers. Well, we will get to the bottom of that in a few minutes, but for right now, let's hear one of Arturo's own pieces. This is called In Whom. That's called In Whom, written by Arturo O'Farrell. He's at the piano, and you heard Adam O'Farrell playing the trumpet, the two of them with us from our virtual green space. Sage writes in, thank you, a fascinating program of great music reinterpreted by father and son. Remarkable, intimate, inspiring. Father and son are with us from LA. Arturo, we have been neighbors for years. What the hell are you doing in LA?
I'm raging against the sun. I get up in the morning, I look out the door, and it's not a cloud, perfect weather, and it infuriates me. And then on top of that, everybody's cheerful and nice and helpful, and that even makes me angrier. But luckily, I'm not a transplant. I'm bi-coastal. I have a beautiful position, professor of global jazz studies at UCLA, and it's an incredible opportunity to shape what a lot of people think jazz is, and to make it certainly more global, and to modernize it to a level that I don't think a lot of institutions are doing. But UCLA said, hey, here, design this program, and I can't think of a more amazing opportunity.
Well, I love the idea of global jazz, not jazz as a specifically American art form, because at this point it's over 100 years and it's gone everywhere and changed, as pop and rock have. So, I mean, just give us what are some of the high notes of the global jazz syllabus?
Well, I had the privilege of hosting a class called Multicultural Perspectives in Jazz, and we brought in Sofia Rey, Antonio Lizana, Jorge Francisco Castillo. We brought in people from all over the world who've been practitioners of jazz. And I got to tell you, I am also of the opinion that jazz, some institutions have nationalized it because it's profitable. But if you look beyond the storyline, you'll realize that jazz has its roots in Pan America and Africa, and even farther back in the nexus of Spain and Northern Africa and Morocco. And if you really go far enough back, as was mentioned in Ned Sublet's book, The Music of Cuba, the roots of all of this are in the Middle East and in far India. So to say that jazz is an American invention is like saying that classical music is an invention of Austria. Just not the case.
Right. The late Randy Weston, great jazz pianist, always had a very Afrocentric flavor to his music, but he looked to Egypt as kind of an ultimate source. So again, that idea that you could look to the Middle East to find something that we think of as a distinctly New Orleans / New York invention.
Well, Americans are very good at claiming ownership of a lot of things that are global. And I also like to think that it's not just a question of the you can't really know where you're going unless you know where you come from. And in a way, understanding the globality of this music is a clue as to its future, and it's happening. The music that we call jazz is being expressed all over the planet in different ways, with different techniques and in different aesthetics. And I think that's exciting.
Adam, with the various projects that you've done, a quartet that doesn't have a comping instrument, do you feel jazz is a constricting term for what you do, or is it now just exploded to the point where it can mean anything?
Well, yes and no. I think. I know what music, I fell in love with first, and I know what has brought me to where I am, what I've been doing, and I don't feel like I don't think it's worth necessarily abandoning that just because it might not have the reach that you want it to, So I think of it, at the same time, yeah, like I think, there's a lot of music that you can call that is marketed as jazz, but I think obviously doesn't really it's not it's questionable, and but I mean honestly like something like Radiohead, like their later discography, I don't know if I call that straight up rock,
Absolutely.
and I think like it's, but also I think what helps that music reach the way it does is that it's called rock. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I don't really have a clear answer,
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're too young to remember record stores, but your dad will remember those. And, it used to be like if there was a saxophone in the credits, on the liner notes, didn't matter what the record sounded. They went into the jazz bin because unless somebody knew what it was, they saw a sax and they just thought, got to be jazz. And you would find the craziest stuff in the jazz bins of record stores because that's where they dumped the things that were world music, what we now call world music, experimental things, whatever people didn't know what to do with.
It's funny because I think that we've lost the sting of jazz. Jazz was always very political, very revolutionary, very, Albert Ayler, Eric Dolphy, Charles Mingus. These were revolutionaries, and it's much less about that now. But I do want to mention that the absence of a piano player in Adam's band is a little bit like patricide, but.
That's one way to look at it.
I did want to ask you about how did he get away with that, not having a piano in the band?
I think it was intentional.
I was actually talking to somebody yesterday, and we were asking about that, and it didn't even like people have asked me had mentioned that both your parents are pianists, why is there no piano? And honestly. And none of it even crossed my mind.
A likely story.
Yeah. Well, it worked for Ornette Coleman. I mean, he won a Pulitzer for that record with the double drummers and the bass and just him on sax. No comping instrument, no piano, no guitar. Adam, the piece we're going to hear next, this is one of yours, right? Where does Beverly Crossing come from?
It was last year I started living in an apartment on 19th Street and Beverly Road in Brooklyn, and my apartment was in the corner of the building, and I had this really amazing view right outside my window, by my desk, and by the piano too, and I had this incredible view that looked out pretty much onto the intersection of 19th Street and Beverly Road, and it was really cool. On one hand, every day was completely the same when I'd look out the window. On the other hand, it felt fresh even through kind of that daily rotation. And
never the same river twice, right?
I guess so. Yeah. So yeah, it was kind of, the tune was meant to sort of convey that simplicity while also kind of leaving room for spontaneity.
Mm-hmm. And room for a piano in this piece, at least.
Every now and then you gotta make some concessions.
I try to stay out of his way.
All right. Adam and Arturo O'Farrell, let's hear their performance of Beverly Crossing. That's called Beverly Crossing. It is a work by Adam O'Farrell playing the trumpet, Arturo O'Farrell playing the piano. Adam, it doesn't sound like the crossing of Beverly Road and 19th Street, like there's all that much happening there. Is it a very kind of slow, mellow intersection?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I don't really know, okay? Because every day is it's just, I feel like it's an amalgamation of several different measurements of time at once, and like that's kind of what the crossing is to me, is like four different, not just four vehicles coming from four different places or whatever, but like four separate kind of, I don't know, inner realities sort of, colliding together at once, So I don't know, it's what fast or slow it moves,
Well, that's slow. That's music that takes its time, that leaves some space. And, that's Arturo, for you, getting a chance to play music like that with your son, there's got to be kind of a special moment.
No, it's funny. I posted about this event, and I wrote that this was my tagline. I wrote, a trumpet, a piano, a son, and a father, reintroduced by circumstance. But that's what it felt like. It felt like we've been here. I was supposed to be back in New York March 12th and 14th. I think the 14th we were playing somewhere, and then I had a premiere at Columbia Theater, and then a week at Malpaso and the Joyce Theater, and then another world premiere with Prism Saxophone Quartet. I mean, both of us had full performance calendar stretching on into the fall, and literally October 15th, everything was canceled. Everything, and that was such a calamitous thing to us. But I think hopefully what we've discovered is that this reset is super vital for our lives, for me personally, and our creativity. And it is a time of being very, very, very slow and appreciating and embracing one another, because that is the true measure of power and wealth.
Yeah. Well, for that reason, I'm especially glad that we had the opportunity to do this with you guys tonight, because while you've been doing that, we've had a chance to document it and to share it with lots of other people. I don't know if post-quarantine there's a duo recording that might happen from this experience, but even if there isn't,
I can't afford them, so.
Now, the piece we're going to leave people with is kind of a classic, and I'm going to assume, Arturo, that this was your call to pick a Fats Waller tune.
I love this piece, and I've been playing this piece my whole life.
So, Jitterbug Waltz is, some of these pieces, have a certain novelty effect to them. Maybe that's something that's sort of accrued over the years as we've become really familiar with them. But this is actually a pretty interesting piece of music, isn't it?
It's a lovely piece of music. First of all, the Jitterbug wasn't in 3. So right away, Fats Waller was having the time of his life messing with people's minds. And if you go back and look at Fats Waller, that was his career, was messing with people's minds, making people smile and have fun and thinking about who they were. And this piece kind of really embodies that for me, Jitterbug Waltz.
Well, once again, a final performance from father and son, from Arturo O'Farrell, Adam O'Farrell. Guys, I'm glad to see you're staying safe and somehow sane there in quarantine in LA, and I hope we get to see the two of you back here in New York, where you belong.
Thank you, John. Thank you, sir. It's good to see all of you back there, and we miss and love you dearly.
All right, here's the Jitterbug Waltz from Adam and Arturo O'Farrell.